My name is Jane Twitmeyer. I'm a resident of Nelson County. And I am also a former inland wetlands commissioner in my Connecticut town. So I know that environmental permitting is always a measure of the value and necessity of a particular project measured against the destruction it will cause and measured against the risk. In addition to air pollution, noise, and environmental justice issues raised here today, there are market-based reasons that may prove the decision to build the $6.5 billion pipeline was really a bad decision, not worth the risks and destruction it will bring. 5 years ago, Dominion made the choice to go all in for natural gas. The choice seemed like a very good business strategy at the time. The gas revolution had just begun, but the truth of that revolution is that it was created by Wall Street hype. Shale and oil gas companies have never made a profit. Now they are $280+ billion in debt, and the loans will start coming due this year. Producing gas from shale is also very different than producing gas from conventional wells. The output of a shale well declines by 70 to 90% after 3 years of drilling. The first 3 years of operation, continue raising production numbers is based on drilling additional wells that have been financed with borrowed money. It is the readily available borrowed money that has allowed the drillers to keep expanding the number of wells, avoiding the steep production decline as the sweet spots have moved wells to less productive areas. Low interest rates, left over from the depression we had, have made it easy for shale firms to borrow and fee-hungry banks cheer on the spectacle. Marcellus Shale is a very large play, but inaccurate analysis from the EIA helped the drilling companies and the Wall Street cause. EIA projections have been called extremely aggressive and very unlikely to be realized. Their predictions would mean producing more than 3 times what the U.S. Geological Survey's mean estimate is of recoverable resources. So the shale revolution has turned into a shale bubble, and to make matters worse, we're in the midst of a major shift in our energy usage. Electricity-hungry IT services located in Virginia only want, oh my goodness, I'm almost finished, only want electricity from renewable sources. We have to change the way we are doing things. Dominion closed down the 2 plants they said were necessary for this pipeline. They now plan to build something else. That wouldn't be necessary either, because it could be filled by the offshore wind combined with PV solar. It would take care of all the peaker demand that we need. You're welcome.
I believe you handed some comments.
Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm here tonight to urge the Air Board and the DEQ to deny the air...
Tell your name.
Oh, pardon me. I skipped over that part. Lee Williams, Richmond, Virginia, 23220. I'm here tonight to urge the Air Board and the DEQ to deny the air pollution permit for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline Compressor Station being proposed in Buckingham County. The effects of climate change are inextricably entwined with health. New data from the World Health Organization show that 9 out of 10 people breathe air containing high levels of pollutants. Updated estimations reveal an alarming death toll of 7 million people a year caused by breathing polluted air both inside and out. I respectfully ask the Air Pollution Control Board to further extend the period for public comment for the proposed Buckingham Compressor Station to at least 60 days from August 8th, 2018, the date the draft permit was issued. Concerned residents will need the maximum time allowable to analyze technical information related to this massive project. I also request that the Department of Environmental Quality complete a quantified risk assessment for the Buckingham Compressor Station prior to permitting, and to work with other state agencies to conduct a health risk assessment and a health impact assessment, which would address cumulative exposure to toxins in the air from all sources, such as the Transco line and the new mega landfill that they're going to be building in Cumberland County. I would question if pre-existing conditions are being taken into account at Union Hill and Buckingham County. Have you quantified disease processes, including diabetes, asthma, and other lung conditions such as chronic bronchitis and pneumonia? How about the incidence of heart conditions, breast and other cancers, COPD, lupus, kidney disease, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, brain tumors, migraines, and more? Where are the studies to assure that the existing Transco pipeline is not contributing to these medical conditions? The 2016 Gasping for Breath report found that ozone smog from natural gas industry pollution is associated with increased asthma attacks and asthma-related emergency room visits and hospital admissions. How far away is the nearest emergency room to residents of Union Hill? Air pollution does not recognize borders. Improving air quality demands sustained and coordinated government action at all levels. This includes countries, states, cities, and counties. We need to work together on solutions for a sustainable planet by developing more efficient and renewable energy production, not continue to build and strand assets in polluting fossil fuels. It is extremely important from the Air Pollution Control Board, it is extremely important that the Air Pollution Control Board defend Union Hill, Buckingham County, and all Virginians' air and climate from the harmful impacts associated with this compressor station. The concerns raised by the residents of Union Hill over the past 4 years have not been given full consideration by this process. Therefore, in order to avoid another situation like this, I urge DEQ to consider environmental justice in all future permitting decisions. The life-threatening burdens Dominion is placing on the Union Hill residents are the result of unchecked systemic oppression perpetuated by the fossil fuel industry, which exposes communities to health, economic, and social hazards. The nature of the vulnerability of the African American and other persons of color fence line communities is intersectional. Thank you for your time.
And I'm the Environmental Justice Chair for the Sierra Club Virginia chapter. And Jolly Weaker, an environmental justice staff attorney for the NRDC, stated, "Environmental justice really reflects the fundamental reality that vulnerable communities are subject to the disproportionate burden of pollution. At the end of the day, when we're talking about environmental impacts, at the heart of it are real people's lives." There are a number of people here today who have dedicated their lives to environmental justice work, and we all agree that the proposed Buckingham compressor station is a flagrant example of environmental racism. I've seen the impacts of compressor stations on health firsthand. My partner, who grew up nearby Dominion's Loudon compressor station, suddenly developed debilitating asthma despite no family history or any personal history after the compressor station was built. To this day, the person I love most cannot even walk more than a block if it is humid outside without having an asthma attack. The negative health impacts associated with compressor stations are scientifically sound. A 2017 report conducted by Physicians for Social Responsibility found that people living near compressor stations have suffered from a variety of symptoms, ranging from skin rashes to gastrointestinal, respiratory, neurological, and psychological problems. Just some of the compounds expected to be released from the Union Hill compressor station include benzene, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, nitrous oxide ammonia, and particulate matter. The impacts of these range from irritating skin rashes to severe or even life-threatening conditions, including difficulty breathing, thyroid problems, precancerous lesions, cancer, and stroke. The draft permit does not adequately explain how the air quality and health of these residents, many of whom already suffer from chronic health problems, will be protected over time from these harmful emissions. By letting this permit stand as is and allowing the compressor station to be built, we are allowing this community to bear a disproportionate burden of environmental harm. This cuts directly against the goals of the Commonwealth's energy policy that demands consideration of disproportionate adverse impacts on economically disadvantaged or minority communities. The Governor's Advisory Council on Environmental Justice has called on Governor Northam and the DEQ to suspend this permit process to allow for thorough analysis of threats to the community and allow Virginians who would suffer most to be well informed and to meaningfully participate. Union Hill and Buckingham County deserve better than this. The stakes are too great to allow such a large polluting facility to be built without safeguards that guarantee human health and the environment will be protected from threats to air quality. This permit fails in ensuring these protections, and to let it stand would be an injustice to Union Hill that the Commonwealth must not allow. Please consider the severity of your decision, acknowledge the inadequacy of this permit, and deny the Buckingham compressor station air permit. Thank you.
I'm a retired teacher from this county with 31 years of educating the kids. And it's a lot of kids I'm worried about with this advent of this permit. And one of the easiest things in the world to do is to promise perfection and compliance and scrutiny. That's so easy. And all of the natural gas people, because I've been, with them so much, these are people I know in my neighborhood, so I try to think, oh my, they must not be making the difference in their mind between natural gas and fracked gas. That must be why so many people that I think are reasonable people are standing in such solid support. But the difference is that there is a really higher reactivity in the gas from the Marcellus Shale. And there's no insurance that will protect from anything that comes from that. And if the compressor is approved, we have done no preliminary hearings or studies or anything on the baseline of our air. There's nobody that's gone and collected, what's the samples now of our water, of our anything. We also have a tiny little volunteer department of both fire people and rescue people who have to come from, our county is 573 some square miles of mass. And they have to come from that far to some station and then be asked to go to an emergency. So we're sitting here looking at the fact that we're receiving Dominion promises left and right about the security of the whole project, about the scrutiny given to, and yet we're wondering, well, why did District 4 feds make them stop for a while? Could it be because they were violating some of the things that they already promised with all due diligence that they were going to do? Why are we receiving from all over the place all sorts of things about, yes, well, they were told not to, but they've gone ahead and doing this work on the forest they're clearing up. And so we don't feel that Dominion Gas is a reliable partner. We don't feel that if you say, yes, this permit will go through, that it will be of advantage.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm Deborah Kushner. I live in Nelson County. The DEQ website states, air quality permits are issued to industries and facilities that emit regulated pollutants to ensure that these emissions do not harm public health or cause significant deterioration in areas that presently have clean air. We're here to talk about air quality, but we wouldn't be here at all if DEQ had disallowed ACP's use of old census data averages in its site suitability prerequisites, census data that NEPA calls unreliable. Virginia Code specifies that development of new energy sources or facilities does not have a disproportionate adverse impact on economically disadvantaged or minority communities, which Union Hill is. FERC and ACP have erased the well-documented cultural significance of Union Hill. This community is being targeted by ACP for the only compressor station in the state, subjecting it to more toxic pollution. ACP is ignoring industry standards of a 40 to 70 mile distance between compressor stations and guaranteeing public harm here. How close would you want to live to this compressor station? The Center for Excellence in Environmental Toxicology at the University of Pennsylvania studied health trends in neighboring counties with and without heavy gas development. The 4-year study showed inpatient hospitalizations increased where there was where there was gas development, and significant decreases where there was none. Minisink, New York has a compressor station, but no other gas activity. The closest regional air sampling station showed pollution levels below federal standards, but air monitoring at homes near the compressor station found particulate matter higher than the regional numbers. Our federal standards are focused on regional air quality. They aren't designed to protect people from frequent, close-range pollution exposure. People unlucky enough to live near compressor stations consistently report illness and disease symptomatic of toxic, carcinogenic, or neurotoxic exposure. All point towards a lack of industry monitoring and a gross underestimation of emissions at the site. Clearly, current standards aren't working. The emissions and health impacts on this neighborhood from the extant Williams Transco line have not been measured. You really don't know if that pipeline is harming the public. Isn't one leaking explosive pipeline in a community enough? Please spare Union Hill. This catastrophic nightmare will destroy individual lives and this historic community.
Minty Zlotnick. I'm a resident of Buckingham County. I live in Yogaville, around 5 miles from the site of the proposed compressor station. I understand that DEQ is following the guidelines of air pollution set by law when developing this air permit with Atlantic Coast Pipeline. The more I read the permit and begin to understand its implications to our air quality, the more I understand that the levels set by law are not adequate to sustain the health of the community closest to the compressor station. And since air travels carry pollution, being 5 miles from the compressor station does not protect me either. We are all at risk, including young children in this school complex here in this building and buildings nearby. DEQ is following the law, as we've heard many, many times. As I see it, DEQ is protected by the law, while we are not. Laws are being made based on the belief that we are separate from the natural world around us. We think we have the power and the right to extract and pollute the environment that actually supports our life. Our bodies are made up of the same non-human elements that everything else is. Our mistake is seeing that we are separate, better, and more powerful. When decisions are made based on the fact that we need to respect the environment that supports our life, the laws that presently protect DEQ and ACP will need to change to a morally based law system that honors the environment, including the people in it, rather than destroying its health. That's my vision. And you know what? You could do this right now. DEQ is not in a position to change the law, but it is in a position to change its mind and how it relates to the law. I understand that you've done your best within the parameters given to you, and I'm grateful for that. But I have to put on record that this is not enough. There are too many studies and too many stories from people who are actually affected by compressor stations for me to believe that the laws we have are adequate. You can make what you probably would consider a radical move to not follow the law and follow your hearts, and make what many of us in this room would consider a moral decision. Do not give ACP this permit. Do not recommend to the State Air Control Board to approve this permit. Make a moral decision. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The ability to speak today. My name is Leslie Coburn. I am the Democratic nominee for the Congress of the United States from the 5th District of Virginia, where we sit today. I recommend that this permit be denied. It is unconscionable to me to place a massive compressor station in the midst of an historic African-American freedmen community. I agree with the NAACP of Virginia that this is an issue of race. This is an issue of environmental justice. Also, as someone headed to Congress, I will tell you that I will take this issue with me and I will never let it rest. Because this is wrong. It is immoral to do this. Any of us, my background, you may know, is investigative journalism. I know what will be spewed into the air from this massive compressor station. Words like benzene, carbon monoxide. When is it appropriate to say that enough is enough? Is it a rash? Is it cancer? Is it asthma? I have walked this community with Pastor Paul Wilson. I know the families that will be hurt by this. This is a freedman community. This is a community where a third of the residents are descendants of slaves, freed either before the war or just after. This land is their land. Dominion has no business putting a massive compressor station in this community. In fact, the National Forest Service rejected this compressor station because of the ill effects on wildlife. How is it that we can subject the people of Union Hill to this travesty? Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name is Georgie Ann Stinnett, and I have a home and I am a landowner within the affected zone of the proposed compressor station. 8 generations of my family have called Buckingham home, and those who are still here include those most vulnerable to dangerous effects of air pollution, young children, and the 92-year-old matriarch of the family who has lung cancer. I am also a former environmental scientist who worked for years under contract to the EPA to ensure that the environment remains a place where everyone can live free of the devastating effects of industrial pollution. With this legacy and background, I am terrified of the thought of one of the largest compressor stations ever built being sited in Union Hill under the flimsy so-called protections of this permit. First, the specifications for the equipment of the facility are, quote, for informational purposes only, and do not form enforceable terms or conditions of the permit. This alone should be enough to reject the permit. How can something of this potentially lethal magnitude be approved if we do not even know what it comprises? Further, the legacy of the special use permit issued by the legality of the special use permit issued by the Buckingham Board of Supervisors is still under legal challenge. Why proceed with an application for an air permit if the status of the SUP is unclear? The description of emission control states that the owner-operator is responsible for complying with monitoring requirements and that written documentation shall be maintained explaining the sufficiency of practices. The assumption here that Dominion will do what is right is grossly misplaced. The procedure described amounts to self-regulation. Given Dominion's and the gas transmission industry's history of environmental disasters, putting them in charge of making sure they are keeping us safe is preposterous. Why is there no mention of controlling air emissions in the event of explosions? How about escape routes for individuals who would need to reach clean air in this event? The system for measuring emissions does not account for the actual impacts of the emissions on human health. The samples are averaged on a regional scale and include times when fewer pollutants are being emitted. This effectively, and quite deliberately by Dominion, disguises blasts of high concentrations of noxious pollutants and misrepresents the air immediately surrounding the station. This is like saying that it's safe to walk in a gun range between the lines of shooters and targets because the bullets do not take up much of the overall airspace, and they are only in the air for brief periods of time. Given the documented deterioration of communal health near existing compressor stations, the DEQ must conduct quantified risk, and health impact assessments. You must deny this permit unless you can prove that the air will indeed stay safe. Thank you.
My name is Frida Cathcart, and I drove up from Roanoke, Virginia. I don't have any property that's being directly affected by the pipelines. I wanted to thank you all for coming here to listen to the public and for your service to the Commonwealth. I have served on 2 state boards, and I know the effort that it takes to do that, and I greatly appreciate your volunteer service. I also want to remind you that when you stepped up to take the appointment, that you swore to uphold the U.S. Constitution and the Virginia Constitution, and that we, the public, rely on that. I happen to be a shareholder in SCANA, which is a public utility down in South Carolina, and Dominion is in the process of buying SCANA. Frank Knapp had a press conference about a month ago. He is the CEO and president of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce. And at that press conference, he called out Dominion for misleading the public. And he said that Virginia is paying for a pipeline that we don't need, and that South Carolina doesn't want to pay for a capital project. They got burned with a VC summer plant that left over $9 billion of stranded assets. There is no market need for the ACP. And if you're looking for why are they building something where there's not a demand for it, it's because there's an outdated federal policy guaranteeing a 15% rate of return on investment. And that is a cost that will be passed on to the ratepayers. And the shareholders aren't going to benefit from it because they're going to end up with stranded assets. It's going to diminish their value of their share. It really is a pipeline scam. It was one thing to think about over a decade ago when they thought that we needed this infrastructure for natural gas. But since then, we have had energy efficiency that has lowered the need for the energy that we thought that we needed, the capacity. Right now, the current infrastructure for natural gas is at 54% of capacity. We don't need this natural gas. I also happen to be a shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway, and Berkshire Hathaway Energy is 50% renewable in Iowa, on track to be 100%. There's been a battery revolution where Australia put in battery plants instead of peaker plants with the natural gas. They reduced their energy costs by 90%. The ACP is expected to raise energy costs in Virginia by 30%. The higher energy costs means that we're going to lose jobs. Businesses are not going to be attracted to come to a state where energy costs 30% more than other places. Please deny this permit. Please, you are so important as a citizen board. Give the courts a chance. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Quinn Robinson, and I live in Buckingham, and I happen to be in the path of the pipeline. And believe me, much damage has already been done. I retired about 14 years ago to a family homestead. It's been in the family since 1852. And I thought it'd be some sanctuary and some seclusion and privacy, calming down from urban warfare and so forth. But it hasn't been. Dominion sort of enters the picture and just wrecks everything. The previous speaker spoke of not being a faithful participant and misrepresenting things. They've lied to the landowners all along the way. All kinds of misrepresentations, a flood of calls and then letters suggesting one thing or another, giving you ultimatums. It's just a bunch of badgering and bullying. And it's unfortunate that the government in Buckingham has given up on this. They sold us out very early. It's beautiful but brutal Buckingham. There's just no sense to it. They're overmatched. I understand that this hearing is confined technically to the air permit itself. And with that understanding, though, I think that the focus and the conditions are misdirected. This is a part of a bigger picture. And the only thing, there's nothing left that I can see to protect the citizens of Buckingham from this. There are no jobs. The ACP admitted in court that they have no employees. I don't know. It's a creation of Dominion to get this through. I don't think that the DEQ should even work with any LLC. They have no standing to do that. I mean, legally they may, but there's nobody on the end of the line. My approach, after having gone through over 4 years of this with Dominion, is the only thing that makes sense in Virginia is stop Dominion, save Virginia. And the draft permit, there's a couple of things I want to mention to you. The illusion that this is so strict and that the pipeline exceeds permits of other similar stations. As far as I understand, there are no similar stations, and that just miseducates people, and it doesn't lend itself to your reliability as a broker of this thing. It's just wrong. I would like two quick things. I hope you don't do this. We don't need it, but if you do, make sure that the Dominion puts all the records online immediately, and that all residents of Buckingham be provided Medicaid immediately at the cost of Dominion. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Chad Ova. I reside in the impacted neighborhood of the compressor station. First of all, I would like to present the petitions that I told Mike Dodd that I would present to him, but since we have the additional 11 days, I will be collecting more. So far, we have 185, 127 being from the community itself that is impacted, and 58 from Virginia. And thank you for that additional 11 days. I feel that probably that was given to us, although I've been told otherwise, was because the hard copy was not delivered to our local public library until August 24th. Therefore, the people in this community who don't have internet access, and there's many, many, many people who don't, including in our impacted neighborhood, so they would not have had an opportunity to actually look. So thank you for that additional days. It's not the 30-day we requested, but we'll take it. So, given the extra time to do a more adequate analysis, if you would have granted us a little more time, and we could really do a better job because we're actually getting quite a few experts on board. You've worked with Dominion for many, many months on this, and we really do feel that we deserve equal consideration. I find it troubling that tonight this is here in a school and I clocked it on my way here, that is a mere 8 miles from the site of the compressor station. So the children who go to this school will be impacted. They'll be out on the playground breathing this air in their smaller lungs, which do have a greater impact. And there's other things about that, about small children and how they take in emissions a lot more than we do as adults. So I think you should keep that in mind. There's other things also. The air permit, they've been already said, the impacts that have been done regionally are, the air modeling is drawing on emission data from Roanoke, from Hopewell, and other areas of the state, and this does not adequately represent our baseline here in Buckingham County. Your national ambient air quality standards only look at what happens in a whole region. They don't look at what is actually present here in Buckingham. Also, the radioactive materials that accompany methane and are present in the Marcellus Shale, these come from radon, which is abundant in that shale, and that's not really considered. You also don't look at multiple pollutants and how they interact and the cumulative effect of all those. That doesn't seem to be considered. And also the location, and as other people have talked about the suit instability. Thank you.
Let me know if you can't hear me. I don't really want to lean over. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to comment tonight on the air permit. I'm a retired Virginia Department of Health epidemiologist, where for nearly 30 years I collected and analyzed data in order to assess risk and prevent harm to the public. My name is Suzanne Keller, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. I'm here tonight because I believe the air permit will allow unacceptable harm to the residents of Union Hill and the surrounding community. In a study of risk to humans from unconventional gas development, Brown and colleagues critique the assumption that regional ambient air standard compliance protects individual health. They pose the following questions that remain unanswered in the air permit application, and the air modeling report. And I quote, "What matters from a health perspective is the content and intensity of exposures at the individual level. The critical questions are, what is a person in a given household exposed to? How high do those exposures climb? How often is that resident exposed to these high levels? What happens physiologically when a particular toxic comes in contact with the human body?" The air permit does not begin to answer or even assess these critical questions about exposures. The permit purports to limit emissions for compliance with regional air quality standards, but it is silent on the actual exposures that people residing nearby will experience when peak emissions occur, such as during startup and shutdown, blowdowns, and picking events. In addition, when the generator is used, peak emissions will include hazardous air pollutants that were not even modeled. There's not a robust body of literature on the health impacts of compressor stations, and from a researcher's point of view, there are reasons for that. What institutional review board would approve exposing human subjects to known carcinogens and known cardiovascular, respiratory, dermatologic irritants, even with their consent? What we do have are self-reported symptoms from residents who live near gas infrastructure. These include respiratory problems, headaches, rashes, lower levels of overall health and well-being, and so forth. These findings are consistent with a number of other retrospective self-reported studies. In conclusion, I believe, and self-reported data show, that the air permit as currently written will not protect nearby residents from health impacts. It should be denied. Thank you.
I represent the group Wild Virginia. I'll start by saying that I do appreciate the fact that the public notice period was extended. I don't think it's adequate. As you've heard, a lot of folks in this community don't have internet access. You've also heard that the materials that were placed in the library were very late. And we learned that the public notice was printed in the Farmville paper. I'm not sure how many people who live right around here get the Farmville paper. I would ask the board to consider telling DEQ to do better and not approving this permit unless they do. On the technical basis, I would ask the board to be very skeptical of what's in this permit and the underlying data for this permit. And I'd ask you to reject the permit as it's drafted. Dominion does not have a good record of providing accurate and complete and honest data in regard to this pipeline. Again, you've heard in this community that they weren't even able or willing to characterize the population that would be affected here in any accurate way. Dominion has also provided information for other regulatory agencies, such as the National Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service, that the courts have now said were inadequate, were wrong, didn't allow those agencies to do their job, and that's the case here too. There are many technical problems with this draft permit that you will get in writing. I would note a couple of them. And again, these have been touched on to some degree, but one of the bases for this permit, of course, is modeling and calculations as to what will happen out there. The best way to know what will happen is to control these emissions on a short time period and with constant monitoring, with continuous monitoring. If those models are correct, then continuous monitoring will show that they are correct. If they are not, which we believe they are not, then that will be hidden by monitoring that is not frequent enough. There should be daily limits on NOx. Long-term limits are appropriate because they're long-term impacts, but where there are short-term impacts, which there are from these pollutants, then there should be short-term limits to address that. Thank you.
For the opportunity to address you today. We will be providing written comments, but I'd like to cover a couple of issues with you. First, how this station will harm the environment and how this station will harm human health. We've retained 3 experts, Ron Sahu, Andrew Gray, and Dr. George Thurston of NYU. Each of those experts have been testifying experts on behalf of the United States Department of Justice when I was a trial attorney there. They continue to represent the United States in litigation against coal-fired power plants. You've received expert reports from them in the past with respect to DEQ's consideration of the Mercury Rule for the state of Virginia, as well as the ODEC power plant Cypress Creek. These experts have reviewed the compressor station application, and Mr. Sahu has identified several deficiencies. For example, one is there's no explanation for why during periods of startup and shutdown when pollution controls are allowed to be turned off, that the plant can operate up to 50% of its capacity. Seems to me that and seems to Dr. Gray, or excuse me, Dr. Sahu, that amount should be lowered. Mr. Gray has determined that the station will emit, and the station Dominion freely admits, as DEQ has found, this station will emit thousands of pounds of nitrogen oxides each year. Some of that nitrogen will fall to the ground within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, will run off or either fall directly into the bay itself. Nitrogen is a bay pollutant, and Virginia is subject to the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load. It is a partner with all of the other states, and it has agreed to reduce the amount of nitrogen that it will discharge to the Chesapeake Bay. There is no discussion in the application or any analysis by DEQ as to how Virginia is going to offset this new load of nitrogen to the Chesapeake. In addition to NOx and several toxic gases, the station will emit particulate matter and VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. Although the state's air quality monitoring report concludes that there's not going to be any excess emissions that would exceed the NAAQS for those pollutants, that is not to say there won't be any harm to public health. Dr. George Thurston, as I stated earlier, from NYU, has spent his entire career studying the human health impacts associated with particulate matter. He has been a member of EPA's Citizen Advisory Board, and according to his research and studies and those of others, there is no lower bound, no lower threshold for exposure to particulate matter.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Hey, my name is Kadis Gabre, and I attend the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia, our state's atom capital. I'm here representing my own thoughts about the havoc this pipeline and compressor station will have on this beautiful community. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the occupied territory of the Moncton people. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Ethiopia. Living there, I was exposed to the dangers of climate change early on. I grew up with droughts and food shortages being irregular occurrences. It's never fun to see undrinkable water coming from your pipes, nor was it fun for me to stay from school because it was too hot that day. I mention this to say that pollution is not contained. It has effects that scale from regions, counties, countries, and our globe. I would like to ask, in the face of this climate change crisis, I would like to ask, how can the DEQ permit the Buckingham compressor? How can the DEQ permit the Buckingham compressor station to release nearly 80 tons of methane per year when we already have a lot of pollutants in our air? Moreover, a 2015 Johns Hopkins study showed that gas used by the compressor station is known to carry radon. Since no analysis of possible impacts of radon on air quality and on human health has been conducted, how can the DEQ issue the permit without the analysis? The people of Buckingham deserve to have proper analysis done by the DEQ so that they do not have to have this burden on themselves. As the 19-year-old college student, I pretty much represent the younger generation. I would like to say that the technology has passed coal, but has also surpassed FICO gas. Pipelines that are advertised as natural, and the new generation has a growing demand for renewable energy and solar. Thank you very much.
My name is Soraya Gonzalez, and I am also a University of Richmond student. My words are my own. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight, and I would also like to acknowledge that many people are here who are essentially forced to be here to fight for their livelihoods. I stand against the construction of the frac gas compression station, and I call on you to reject the air permit. Identifying the compressor station as a minor source of emission is false. The science used to measure emissions is inherently flawed. It is wrong to allow emissions checks to be annualized because this only produces an average, which falsely minimizes the very serious health effects that result from the peak points of emission, which would happen during blowdowns. Millions of cubic feet of unfiltered toxins are released into the air during a blowdown. The air quality will be affected, and the air will become unsafe to breathe if this compression station is built. Carcinogens like radon gas can be released into the air. Some people live as close as half a mile to this compressor station. These people definitely will suffer, but who else will suffer? How much of the released methane and toxins travel beyond Buckingham County and Union Hill? What schools and how many children will be affected? The placement of the compressor station in Buckingham County is absolutely environmental racism. It is no coincidence that the station is to be built in an historic African American community. Climate change is the most imminent threat that we are facing now as humans, and across culture it is the most marginalized and oppressed people who are harmed the most from environmental destruction. It is low-income communities, Black and brown communities who face the most grave threats of environmental degradation. Please do not help perpetuate this injustice. No human should have to fight for clean, breathable air, for clean water. Please understand that the implications of this issue are life and death. And please do not allow Dominion to rob the people of this community of their right to live. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to Buckingham this evening and for hearing from concerned members of the community. We also thank you for the additional time to submit comments. We will be submitting fuller written comments within the extended deadline. Given that we're submitting written comments, I won't summarize everything that we're going to submit to you there, but having had the chance to sit here and listen to the impassioned voices from the community most directly affected by this new source of industrial pollution, I wanted to rise and speak about what you will be taking with you from here tonight, and to encourage you to consider as relevant the issues that you have heard from members of the community related to things such as the need for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and thus the compressor station. As part of its review, the Air Pollution Control Board shall consider facts and circumstances relevant to the reasonableness of the activity, including the social and economic value of the activity involved. Given that statutory obligation, again, I would urge you to take into consideration those comments that you have heard tonight about the lack of demonstrated need for this compressor station and the pipeline. As you have heard, the pipeline itself is a project of a conglomeration of utility companies. who have gone to FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, seeking permission to build this pipeline for the purpose of supplying gas primarily for electric generation in Virginia and North Carolina. And yet, demand for electricity has been flat over the last decade. Independent studies have shown that the region has adequate capacity to meet its electric generation needs from existing pipeline infrastructure. And in May of this year, Dominion announced that it has no plans to build any more gas-fired combined cycle power plants. So again, these are issues that are relevant for your consideration as you think about the air permit going forward. In addition, you've heard a lot of comments about site suitability. Again, the same statute requires consideration of the reasonableness of the activity to the site. And so I would urge you to consider all the testimony you've heard tonight about environmental justice, about the historic Union Hill community, and make sure that those voices are not lost as you consider this permit going forward. Thank you.
My name is Caroline Pruitt. I live in Henrico County, Virginia, and I have come down here to stay with my friends at Union Hill, but out of concern for the safety and the health of both the people in the community, of the air and the natural beauty of this community. Last summer, Pastor Wilson and other members of the congregation invited people from all over the state to come down and, partake in, just see the vibrancy and beauty of that community, the people who have, their homes in the line of potential pollution, potential explosions, and other exposure to the pipeline. This school that we're in right now is, I agree with the people who said I would not be comfortable sending my kids to a school that is this close to something that is being built there. But I'm not just down here to talk about what should not go up in someone's backyard, because again, I'm here from the Richmond area. We all have the same backyard right now. I actually have a guest room that I might have to give over to some folks who are coming up from Hampton Roads because of evacuation due to an extreme hurricane that we're all preparing for. And these storms are only going to continue to intensify due to climate change. No matter how many people get paid to come here and say that natural gas is clean and natural and safe, we know there's nothing clean or safe or natural about the fracking process. And I don't think anybody really believes that. So I just, another thing I've heard folks say is that we need to replace this aging fossil fuel infrastructure that we have. And that made me laugh, because new fossil fuel infrastructure 30, 40 years from now will be aging infrastructure. And instead of creating this process by which we're constantly having to replace and monitor these dangerous things that are going to become stranded assets, and as far as whatever strict criteria that DEQ says they're going to use, when I hear this is the 5 times stricter than this has ever been done before, it makes me wonder, what do they know? Why is it being treated this way? Is this just something that is being fed to us to make us feel better? Can we trust DEQ to enforce these standards? Can we trust Dominion to report honestly? And I have a whole lot of concern. The more I hear, the more concerned that I am. I hope the Air Pollution Board will take their duty seriously and deny these permits. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
The Hanuman, I live here in Buckingham, about 5 miles from the proposed compressor station, and at Yogaville, so quite near to the proposed pipeline as well. After listening to 46 commenters before me, it really sticks in my mind that no one who has spoken in favor of this project, this ACP, this compressor station, live in the community. They're speaking from a distance. The other thing that I really wonder is, what amount of poison or pollution is okay? Isn't it all right to have none? Why should we want to add pollution? How can we say that any amount of this is going to be all right for us? I question how you can justify approving a 54,000 horsepower Buckingham compressor station when the mission in the DEQ information states that Virginia's diverse geography and abundant natural resources benefit agriculture, industry, and commerce, and provide a rich environment for people, plants, and wildlife to ensure the continued vitality of what the Commonwealth has to offer. The mission of the Department of Environmental Quality is to protect and improve the environment for the well-being of all Virginians. That sounds so noble. How will you achieve this mission if you allow over 200 tons of annual air pollutants and additionally 296,000 tons of CO2 and 5.3 tons of hazardous air pollutant emissions every year? From your town hall post, there's a statement of the figures for how many tons or partial tons will be emitted. So I've included that here in my statement, which I will be leaving with you. As Hurricane Florence threatens us, it seems to me a wake-up call that business as usual no longer applies. Complying with previous standards is no longer adequate. Today, President Trump's acting EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler gave the oil and gas industry a huge break at the expense of the American public. Companies will be able to put off crucially important leak detection and repair requirements. Now is not the time to be undermining our protections. This summer, a comprehensive study in Science magazine found that methane emissions from oil and gas.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
In your written comment.
My name is Jonathan Sokolow, and I apologize for my atrociously bad handwriting. I am an attorney, a writer. I live in Fairfax County, and I came down here today to bear witness to this. And first of all, thank you all for coming to Buckingham County. I think it's appropriate to note at the outset that today is September 11th, the 17th anniversary of those terrible events in New York and in Arlington. And in Pennsylvania. And the reason I mention that is we're all Americans, we all share a common experience, we all share a common history, and we all share a common destiny. And it's important to remember our history, and I think it's important for you all and for the Air Quality Board to remember our history when deciding when making what will be a historic decision. 150 years ago, almost 150 years ago, not far from here, the Buckingham County Courthouse was burned down by an arsonist. And it was burned down on the same day that Congress adopted the 15th Amendment, giving freedmen the right to vote, on paper at least. That arsonist was never caught, but it was important because it destroyed the county records that the freedmen could have used to attain their rights, including the rights to restitution, including property rights that have been stolen from them because of hundreds of years of slavery. The decision that this board is going to make, as I said, is a historic decision. History will record it. History will record that Ralph Northam was the governor of Virginia when the fate of Union Hill was decided. History will record that David Paler was the head of the Department of Environmental Quality when that decision was made, and it will record the names of everybody who had a hand in that decision, which gives you an opportunity to right a historic wrong. Dominion Energy tried to erase this community, as others have noted, in the paperwork that it filed with the federal government by saying that there was no cohesive community in Union Hill, by doctoring the census data to eliminate the fact that there was an 85% people of color community, largely African American, within a mile of the compressor station, 2 historic Baptist churches. Dominion tried to erase that community, just like that arsonist in 1869 tried to erase the community. So history will record what you do, and it's an opportunity for you all to right those wrongs. As I said, we are all Americans. We all share a common history. We share a common destiny. And this is important to recognize. And I'd like you to think of your children and 7 generations later of your children when you make this decision. We all breathe air. We all drink water. And therefore, we all, everybody in this room and all of you, are Union Hill. Thank you.
Amen.